While not the most prominent topic in the community, I do see and hear people discussing the power deltas for PvE on a fairly regular basis. I've heard that damage scales past an activity's power level. I've heard that it doesn't. I've heard talk of there being groupings alongside phrases like, if I hit this next level, I'll be in the next delta. And of these groupings, I've heard talk of them being every 5 levels, as well as them being every 10 levels. Long story short, there's a lot of confusion in the community about how damage works in Destiny 2, and my goal with this video is to hopefully clear up that confusion and explain how we as Guardians both deal damage and how we take damage. Now, right at the beginning of the video, I want to give you guys a sort of too long didn't watch style synopsis. There are 4 ways that damage is taken and dealt. Those 4 are damage dealt when above an activity's power level, damage dealt when below an activity's power level, damage taken when above an activity's power level, and damage taken when below an activity's power level. So first, when your overall level is above an activity's level, your damage dealt flatlines. It doesn't matter if you're 540 or 590 in a 540 activity, you will always do the same damage, unless you somehow stay the same overall power, but increase the power level of a weapon. Then you will see a slight increase in damage. When your overall level is below an activity, damage dealt decreases by set amounts that change every level you are under that activity. So for the first 10 under, it's 2.31% per level, and that set amount changes every 10 additional levels you're below an activity. So for 11 to 20 under, that amount is 1.164% per level, and 21 to 30 under, it's 0.666% per level. And those types of changes continue all the way to 50 under. For damage taken, when above an activity's level, you increase your damage resistance steadily for each level, and the amount per level ranges from 0.6% damage reduction to a 1.2% damage reduction per level, capping out at a 40.9% damage reduction at 50 above. And for damage taken when below an activity's level, it's similar to the damage resistance when above, but instead it's extra damage taken, and that extra damage ranges from 3.1% extra at 1 level below to 150.6% extra damage at 49 levels below. Now, I know that was quick, but if that was enough information for you guys, go out and take what you learned. But for those of you who want more and want a more in-depth explanation, stay here. Also, if you guys just want more information on a particular section, you can skip to the times shown on screen now, and they're also linked in the description. So first, let's talk about how we deal damage. Obviously, every weapon does different damage amounts. We have Nightfalls, Strikes, and Heroic Adventure modifiers. We have buffs such as Empowering Rift and Hammer Strike, and we have perks like Kill Clip and Rampage. All of those things alter how damage is dealt to enemies, but this video isn't about those things. This video's focus is if an activity is a certain power level, and you are a certain power level, whatever those may be, how will that affect your damage? Now, in order to test this, I used the Nightfall Strike the Corrupted, a 540 activity. At the time of testing, I was power level 585, and my weapon of choice was a non-masterworked Whisper the Worm at power level 590. The modifiers on the card every single time were Solar Singe and Heavyweight. I would then load into the Nightfall, I would headshot an Orange Bar Corrupted Raider, and then record the damage it did, which happened to be 118,920 damage. Now, I do want to mention that some people may be confused as to why I use Solar Singe and Heavyweight. This was done to allow my damage numbers to reach into a 6-digit range, allowing for more accuracy as I tested future scenarios. After I got my information on that single headshot while power level 585 in a 540 activity, I would return to orbit and then alter my card slightly, increasing the power handicap by 1, synthetically dropping my power level from 585 to 584. This is where the first myth will get cleared up. When I entered the same activity at 1 power less than before, the myth is that I should do less damage, but I still do 118,920 damage. Now, me saying this will lead people to argue that damage stops scaling after you are 20 levels over an activity, and that being 584 versus 585 would make no difference, and I should drop my card to 560 and then compare it to 559, because that's where I would see a difference. So that's exactly what I did. But when I did this at both 559 and at 560, my damage was still 118,920. And even all the way down to power level 540, matching the activity, I still did 118,920 damage. So the first thing that I want you to take from this video is that if you're at or above an activity's level, your damage no longer increases. It does not matter if you're 540 doing a 540 activity or a 590 doing a 540 activity. Your damage will always be the same as long as you're using the exact same weapon. Now, you may have noticed that I put emphasis on the word exact. Because while a Whisper of the Worm is still a Whisper of the Worm, regardless if it's power level 540 or if it's power level 590, the game calculates the damage differently for those two scenarios. And this is why people believe that damage keeps scaling based on overall power level, but in reality, it's scaling based on the weapon's power level. Let me try to explain this better. It is possible for someone to be overall power level 585 and have a power level 585 Whisper of the Worm, but it's also possible for someone to be power level 585 and have a power level 590 Whisper of the Worm. These two people will do different damage with their whispers. It is minor, but there is a difference. So the second thing I want you to take from this video is that overall power, once it passes the activities level, damage will stay the same, but if you get a stronger weapon, you will see a damage increase. So now you hopefully understand how damage is handled when your overall power level is over an activity's power level. But what happens when your overall power level is under an activity's power level? I tested this the same way I tested being above the activity. I was power level 585, my Whisper was 590, Solar Singe and Heavyweight were on the Nightfall card, I was in the Nightfall Strike the Corrupted, I shot the Corrupted Raider, and I used a power handicap to drop my level. I did this for 539, 538, 537, and so on and so on and so on, all the way down to power level 490. And from this, I can tell you two things. One, the community is right in saying there are groups of 10 when it comes to the Delta. But two, the community is wrong in saying that there are groups of 10 when it comes to the Delta. Yes, I contradicted myself there, but I'll explain. When you are one level below an activities level, you will do 2.31% less damage than if you would if you were on level. If you are 2 levels below an activity, you will do 2.31% less damage overall, totaling 4.62% less damage. And this continues this trend, reducing your overall damage dealt by 2.31% for every level you are under an activity until you are 10 levels under. Once you are 10 under, your damage penalty totals 23.11%, but once you are 11 levels under, it no longer reduces your damage by 2.31% each level and instead starts reducing it by 1.164%, and then continues that trend for 12, 13, 14, all the way to 20. Each level, your damage is reduced by an additional 1.164%. So to quickly recap that, at 1 level under, you do 2.31% less damage than you would if you were on level. At 5 under, you'd do 11.55% less. At 10, you do 23.11% less, but at 11, instead of doing 25.42% less like you'd expect, you instead do 24.27% less, because it's now a 1.164% reduction and no longer a 2.31% reduction. Hopefully that makes sense. But to continue, from 21 to 30 under, each level changes the reduction from 1.164 to 0.666%. From 31 to 40 under, each level changes the reduction from 0.666% to 0.124%, and from 41 to 49, it changes from 0.124% to 0.055%. And of course, at 50 under, the enemies are immune. So yes, there are delta groups that are 10 levels apart, but each level affects your damage. Now hopefully, to consolidate this information, I created two graphs that will hopefully allow you to visualize it. The first graph, shown right now, shows the damage of a 590 Whisper in the Nightfall compared to your power level. As you see, at power level 490, the damage is 0. This is because in this scenario, you're 50 levels under the activity and the enemies are immune. From power level 491 to 539, it increases in a linear fashion, and the slope of that line changes every time you get 10 levels closer to matching the activity. And then once you're at or above the activity, the damage flatlines. Then we have the second graph I created that shows the overall damage reduction the lower your power levels get when compared to the activity's power level. Hopefully, all this combined allows you to understand how damage is dealt to enemies, but we're only about halfway done here. We still have to talk about how damage is taken, so let's do that. So damage taken is an entirely different beast, and the way to test it isn't just look at some numbers on the screen. No, testing damage involves about 110 screenshots of Guardians getting meleeed by the same adherent in the Strange Terrain Nightfall at different light levels, and then counting the number of pixels that are missing from the health bar. Now I know a lot of you probably trust that I did in fact take all those screenshots, but in case you don't believe me, in the description is a link to an Imager album with all 100 screenshots, and here's a short animation made with those screenshots. Alright, with that part out of the way, let's actually talk the numbers. As I previously stated, these tests were done in a Nightfall, a 540 activity, so the baseline damage taken would be a power level 540 Guardian getting meleeed by a 540 enemy in a Nightfall, and for simplicity's sake, we're going to pretend the Guardian has 200 health. This means our baseline damage taken was 162 pixels, which converts to exactly 37.5% of the health bar, or 75 damage. And this baseline is how we're going to determine how damage taken works. So first, let's talk about what happens when you're above an activity's power level, or in this case, 541 and above. Unlike damage dealt, it doesn't plateau, and instead the higher you are, the less you take. For the first 4 levels, or 541 to 554, you take 0.6% less damage per level, or 0.6% less damage, then 1.3% less damage, then 1.9% less damage, and so on. Once you are 5 above, all the way up to being 13 above, or from 545 to 553, this shifts to a 0.7% damage reduction per level. At 14 above, all the way to 22 above, or 554 to 562, this shifts to 0.8% per level. From 23 above to 30 above, or 563 to 570, it shifts to a 0.9% damage reduction. From 31 to 38 above, or 571 to 578, it becomes an additional 1% reduction. The next 6 are a 1.1% reduction per level, and the last 6 are a 1.2% damage reduction per level. Now, for those of you that are really good at math, you realize that I stopped at 590. And that there are still 10 levels above that. And I did this because this is where your damage reduction caps out. Just like how we can't damage an enemy when we're 50 below their level, we can't resist any more additional damage when we are 50 above them. Now, I want to make it very clear that each level is different, as I stated in the previous section, and you take less damage for every level above the enemy. But if you want some sort of thresholds to use as a gauge, I'm going to provide those to you right now. At 7 levels above, your damage reduction sits at 5.2%. At 14 above, it sits at 10.2%. At 21 above, it sits at a 15.7% reduction. At 27 above, it sits at exactly 20%. At 33 above, your damage reduction sits at 25.6%. At 39 above, it sits at 30.6%. At 44 above, it's exactly 35%. And it caps out at 50 above at a 40.9% damage reduction. It's fairly linear and straightforward, but there is a significant damage reduction because 40.9% damage reduction is pretty hefty. Now, that being said, I guess if there was something that I'd want you to take away from this part of the video, is that when you are above an activity's power level, you take less damage the higher you are above that activity. And that damage reduction caps out at 50 above the activity at a 40.9% damage reduction. So this leaves the final part of the video. What happens to damage taken when you're below an activity's power level? This functions in a very similar way as to how it works when you're above an activity, but it's a lot steeper. So let's start right at 539 and work down. From 1 level below, at 539, to 10 levels below, at 530, it increases the damage taken by 3.1% each level. So already, at 530, you are taking 32.7% more damage than you would if you were at the intended activity's level. Then, from 11 below at 529 to 18 below at 522, this increases the damage taken from 3.1% per level to about 6.8% per level, increasing the damage taken to 88.3% at just 18 levels below an activity. The next group is from 19 levels below to 30 levels below, or 521 to 510. This shifts it back to 3.1% per level, so being 30 levels below an activity adds an additional 125.3% extra damage per hit, leaving the last group being 31 levels below an activity all the way to being 49 levels below an activity, where it increases the damage taken by about 1.2% per level, capping out at 150.6% extra damage taken. And of course, at 50 below the activity, they one-shot you with the melee used to test all of this. Now, like before, I want to drive home that every level is different, but I want to provide some thresholds for you to use to gauge damage taken. While matching an activity, you take the intended amount of damage. At 8 below an activity, you take about 25.9% extra damage. At 13 below an activity, you take 53.1% extra damage. At 16 below, you take 74.1% extra damage. At 22 below, you take 100.6% extra damage. At 30 below, you take 125.3% extra. And at 49 below, you take 150.6% extra damage. Now, I know this video was really mathy, I know it was probably way more in depth than it needed to be, but I find this stuff really interesting and I hope that you do as well, or at the very least you learn something about how damage works in Destiny. If you did enjoy this video, or you learned something, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that like button. And if you happen to be new here, be sure to subscribe. Also, this video took a really long time to make, so if you feel it's worthy, spread this around, show your friends, tell your clanmates about it, help me teach the community how damage actually works in Destiny. Regardless, as always, I just appreciate the fact that you watched the entire video, and to all of you, thank you for your continued support. Check out the links in the description, follow me on Twitter, join my community Discord, do whatever you usually do after watching a video. That's all I got for you guys today, so I'm gonna get out of here, say my name is Matt, and I'll see you guys next time.